mean, a lot of people made realizations about their life during the pandemic and made decisions based on possibility, which is awesome, right? It's like seeing other sides, testing whether the grass is greener, and then evaluating whether it was, coming back or staying away. But I think when it comes to becoming a parent and everything that's attached to that, it usually means like, okay, making some pretty significant sacrifices. And I'm totally fine with making sacrifices. I mean, that's part of it, right? But yeah, there's just like it impacts our well-being and our state of mind as parents when we have to give up like pretty much everything that we were before.
Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Welcome to another episode of the And Both podcast. My guest this week is Nicole Lenzen. She's a coach and consultant in the parental leave space, and she has a background that's very cool. She came from tech and fashion and marketing and all these different avenues, which do actually have a pretty solid through line that we talk about in the episode. She talks about navigating motherhood and the challenge of parental leave that led to the area that she works in now, and this idea of kind of going, which eventually led to some significant health consequences for her that I'll let her tell you about in the episode. But that reframing or that hard stop that gave time and a 30,000 foot view to reframe and to reevaluate where she was and where she wanted to go, and all of those pieces is a big part of the episode. So I hope you enjoy. And again, if you are loving the conversation, please like, follow, rate, leave a review for the show. It helps us spread the word. It helps these conversations find the people that are looking for them. So thank you and enjoy. Hello and welcome back to the And Both podcast. I am here today with Nicole Lenzen. Hi, Nicole. Welcome.
Hey, Ashley. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited. I am excited, but in the, full disclosure, whatever, we tried to record a podcast earlier and we had this like amazing conversation going. And then of course, technology gets in the way. And I figured in the most like mom moment ever, I figured out after that I had too many tabs open to be able to like effectively run the thing that I wanted to do, which I always like to point out because it's like that whole, get your own mask on or whatever. But like, really, we just keep opening tabs and like wait until the whole thing crashes. Yeah. Really. So if you don't mind telling people a little bit about you and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a solo mom by design. I have a 2-year-old daughter. I am also a coach and consultant, and I work in the parental leave space, amongst others. But I work with expecting parents and their managers to successfully navigate the transition in the before, during, and after parental leave. And I partner with organizations to implement these programs as an in-house benefit or learning and development tool. And I also work with clients across other major life transitions, whether they are going through a career upheaval or an intentional shift, whether they are looking to grow into a leadership role and develop stronger communication skills, deepen their relationships, and all of the above.
That's a serious backpack full of tools. I love it. So you did not start out in the parental leave space, right? You were in another area.
Yeah. So I have a pretty nonlinear career. I originally studied computer science of all things. Kind of one of those, I don't know if it's still scientifically accurate, but left brain, right brain folks, and worked in Silicon Valley for a bit and was like, nope, culturally, this is not for me. Went back to school, studied fashion design, couture, and became a custom couture wedding designer for non-traditional brides. This is in San Francisco, which was really rewarding. Similar to coaching in some ways, helping people through that major life transition. Worked with a lot of same gender clients, people who wanted to reclaim their grandmother's dress. So I was definitely not the let's emulate the ball gown type of business model. It was definitely much more intimate. And there was, like I said, alluding to the coaching, what's going on with folks at that time, deciding to commit to a partner, having all the family drama, the involvement. And then, yeah, like I was in San Francisco and then Mayor Gavin Newsom made legalized same-sex marriage well before the federal ruling. And it was an exciting time to be celebrating LGBTQIA partnerships. So that was great. Then I ended up moving to New York and started doing a lot of consulting work and kind of ended up bridging my backgrounds in fashion product development and digital product development. It was a time when companies were going through digital transformations. They were still, in the fashion industry, faxing things overseas, the factories. So you can imagine what a mess that was. However, the executives kept making decisions of what software to buy were not in touch at all with the end users. So I kind of found my niche for a while in terms of bringing human-centered design and user needs to the forefront and partnering with engineering to build solutions that actually make sense and then deliver business value at the end of the day. And worked in innovation for a while following that. Also got super, I had always been interested in sustainability, even when I was a bridal designer. But when you start working at a global scale, you realize the impact, the negative impact, social, environmental, organizational, etc. And so that was a period in my life when I really got into the kind of problem solving, the what if, the futures work, to think about, how can we do this differently? And then I'll fast forward to a moment in life when I was just, my workaholism was at its peak. And I was consulting, flying around the world, loving life, by the way, but working like a maniac, and ended up getting type 1 diabetes as an adult, which is typically juvenile onset, but it's an autoimmune disease. And it was, to me, very clearly linked to chronic stress.
Yeah.
Constantly being in this like heightened nervous system state. And that was a wake-up call for me. And that led me to want to be a mom and pursue the solo journey during the pandemic. And then had a really terrible return to work post parental leave experience. And that ended up being another big perspective shift where I decided to pursue coaching and support folks in similar situations who just really did not have enough support. And yeah, so that's kind of the long, not even the long version, the windy version. Like how I got to coaching.
I love it. I always think it's so funny when people are like, none of my things are related. Like nothing in my career is related or nothing in my life is related. And I'm like, oh, it definitely is for sure. Like, so you start out in this like really ambiguous kind of setting, right? Like, cause tech is ambiguous. It's like keyboard magician kind of thing, right? There's like no human to human. And then everything you do after that is human centered, but like in like this is a really not tricky's not the right word, but this is a really like soft time in your life where you're like kind of in that like malleable space. And you're like, I'll help you. No problem. I'll help you. And then, but you sort of like, it's like the same thing in these different industries. So I think there's like a definite straight line
Yeah. I love that you're calling out the softness and the ambiguity, because I think that is, it's for some reason a comfort space for me. I mean, yes, of course, there's always discomfort in the unknown, but it's always been there. It's always been there in my own life. It's always been there in the type of work that I do, and getting my teams, especially when I was leading big multidisciplinary teams and these big projects where it's very early stage blue sky innovation stuff. It's like, what problem are we solving? What are we doing? What do I do tomorrow? today. And it's really aligning people around a goal, figuring out what's the most important thing to solve for, and, rallying different skill sets together to come up with solutions. And yeah, it's similar even in working with individuals, especially with all of the unknowns. I mean, parenthood is a huge unknown. The economy is a huge unknown.
Yeah.
AI is a huge unknown. And, nothing is really set in stone like it used to be. And it's like, okay, double-edged swords. Like, great, we have all these quote unquote choice, but then nothing feels stable or solid under our feet. And so what are some tools that we can internally build to feel more comfortable in these situations and in life and more grounded in who we are?
I think that's amazing, because it really is like, when you think about like the beginning of legalizing, same-sex marriage, that's sort of like I think that's amazing. I think like that whole process, and like, you turn on the TV and you see people getting married and everyone is like so happy and in love, and you're like, oh my God, this is like the things that you want to see in the world, right? Like, you want your kids to see people that love each other, and you want them to want to experience that. And then there's all that junk. I'll say that because maybe this will be a PG podcast forever. Is that all the junk of like, the bakeries that wouldn't make cakes and like those pieces where it's just like, can we stop focusing? Can we stop giving airtime to people who are doing that? Instead, give the airtime and the recognition to people who are like, you're going through a thing, and maybe, I mean, I don't know about like the culture of San Francisco, but like, maybe even though you live in a really progressive city and like this is not a new thing, you're not the first person to marry someone of the same sex, but maybe your family's not supportive, and like, where does that come out, right? Like, everyone cries when they put on a wedding dress or try on a wedding dress, and there's big feelings around that because it's a big thing. And so you see people like in that moment, but there's also that layer of like, they may not have the support that they need. And then working in the postpartum space, it's like, you are incredibly vulnerable in that space, right? Like, you need a job to live, and you have a baby, and everything is like a 12 out of 10, and people are like, well, you're just stuck with what you're at. So
there's so much packed into what you said. I love that you use the word layer. It's actually the name of my newsletter, Layer by Layer, because
I love it.
It's just kind of this high level umbrella of like identity and, all the things that we face, and what are the layers that we have been given without asking for them, what are the layers that we actually choose to wear or embrace, what are the ones that we want to shed, what are the ones that we want to actively create. And it feels like at the end of the day, it's like every person's experience is unique, but then there's also all of these shared things, right? That we experience. And I was actually talking to a friend recently about how we don't talk enough about what's going on like collectively. It's still like pretty isolated. So it's like, whether it's politics or whether it's just the weather, or whether it's, these shifts, it's like they come up in conversation, but we don't really talk about them in terms of how they're impacting us. And so we've got this all these environmental factors. We've got our current situation, whether it's like, I've just lost my job, or I'm pregnant, or I can't get pregnant, or I'm dealing with a toxic boss, or whatever. And then we've got all her historical trauma, right? I know you wrote an article recently about intergenerational trauma, which I really enjoyed reading. Thanks for sharing that. It was very personal.
Thank you.
And I think it's part of this work, part of the coaching work, and part of the self-discovery that helps us identify, what are the views that we're carrying around? Why do I not want to sell a cake to a gay person? I mean, honestly, right? Like,
right.
Are you actually scared of this gay person? No, I don't think so. But there's something fundamentally underneath that is you don't come to terms with, that we're just going to continue passing this trauma down, and our kids are going to have it, and their kids are going to have it, and it's just going to continue manifesting in these really unhealthy patterns and sometimes dangerous patterns for people.
Yeah.
So it's just like, but it's hard work, right? And there's a lot of resistance to doing it. There's a lot of denial, but it's so necessary in terms of just bringing out more humanity.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I agree like a million percent. It's that idea of like, I didn't have a choice that this was put upon me. So like it's not my fault. Like I feel like that's the math that people do, right? It's like this happened to me, it's not my fault, so like I don't have to deal with it. But like if I was the one that initiated whatever, in terms of like some sort of like trauma piece versus the stuff that gets like it's like you're born and someone hands you a backpack of their crap and they're like, here you go. This is yours. I've been carrying this for a long time. It doesn't really belong to me. I took a few things out, maybe if you're lucky, but like the backpack's still yours. And I think that that's the part that it's like, why, like we all keep picking up the backpack.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, and also too, and both with that is that sometimes you want to put down the backpack and someone just keeps handing it back to you. And you're just like, okay, no, like I said, no, and I don't want this.
Yeah. Which that's, yeah, like a, therapy conversation, but and you're used to that weight, then that you're going to continue to accumulate more backpacks, right? Because you haven't learned to distinguish, differentiate and figure out that, oh, actually you can continue letting go of those things and you can be a lot more airy and light if you choose to. Not that it's not difficult, but yeah, the repeated patterns can really get us.
Yeah. And the process of trying to discern, I think that's another part too, is like the process of trying to discern what is actually your problem and what is not your problem. And I think that like especially when you are younger and you are looking to those around you to help inform how you feel about, that piece, the relationship piece and who's responsible for what. I feel like that's a place where we could really make some serious shortcuts if the conversation around layers of relationships and what belongs where and what doesn't belong there. Because I think a lot of times people just take it. It's the because I said so parenting, right?
Right.
It's like, this is your problem because I said so.
Yeah. Which doesn't open up any avenue for understanding or communication or shift. And unfortunately, that's the power dynamic of a lot of companies and a lot of countries.
Yeah.
So it's, we're exposed to it possibly from a very young age, and then it just continues to perpetuate. And that's all we know. And so, of course, it renders us feeling very incapable of, stepping into our own autonomy.
And when you were going back from leave and you said you had a terrible experience, you ended up going back and then leaving, right? You went for a little bit.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where, like a lot of companies do, they clap their hands, pat themselves on the back for having a paid parental policy, which is great. It is. We do not have a federal mandated policy, and although I do think in New York actually it is required for certain size companies, but at least to offer FMLA. But I don't remember the policies. I mean, that's another problem. It's just all over the place. So
yeah,
understanding policies is so tricky. But so it was thrown over the fence and it's like, great, cool. You're going to have a baby, awesome. And I was in a leadership position and of course did what I could to transition work when I was out. That actually seemed to be pretty effective. I mean, fortunately, because I had someone I could really trust and lean in when I was out. And then when I was on leave or about to return to, actually the whole time, just the administrative nightmare of having to basically process it myself, because like I said, we had no benefits coordinator or anyone in HR who wanted to assume responsibility for this, no dedicated resources. I don't know anybody else who's had to go through this. It's an absolute nightmare. You're on call MetLife for hours at a time, trying to find the right person. You're getting mixed information. Is it short-term disability? Is it this? Is it that? Then, you end up getting overpaid and you have to create a spreadsheet of how you want to get money taken out of your future paycheck. Like, it's just like, why, as a mom of a newborn, do I need to handle all this stuff? And that again is like another really common set of circumstances, just like a slice of the possibility of the pain there. And then when I returned, I was very, committed to this role. And there was a lot going on at the company, a lot of tension within the leadership team. And, coming from a design thinking and facilitation background, I was very keen on like bringing in a third party to help facilitate through some of these difficult conversations that were happening. And there was not interest in that. I feel like every week, if not more than once a week, somebody reaches out to me or I hear about somebody who's been, let go during pregnancy or during leave or post leave. And yes, generally there are like larger layoffs happening. So there could be bundling up with that, but there's such lack. It's to me, it's a lack of humanity. It's like, okay, business is business, but the way that you're treated, and I mean, I won't even get into like the months that I didn't have health insurance because they failed to like send the information to Cobra, even though they said they were going to. And like, it's like, okay, I need my insulin. I need my asthma medication. My daughter needs all her pediatric appointments. It's like, so the way that was just like, well, we want to keep our self safe, so we're not going to communicate with you. And again, it's all on you. It's like, that's the worst part of it. And that's what I've heard from so many other women, probably men, who have gone through similar experiences, is that it's not just like, okay, the fact that you lost your job and you lost your identity that was associated with that job, and that you're in this completely demoralized place. Bad enough, it's the way that you're treated through it. A complete lack of humanity because of fear. It's that underlying fear that companies have that they don't want to get into legal trouble.
That's the like the balance, right? Of like, I am, that company started as like one or two people, right? Every company starts as one or two people, and then it grows and grows and grows. And then at some point it tips the scale where, as much as you want to try and have that corporate culture of like humanity and people together and all that stuff, like you end up becoming a number. And as much as the lip service around like you're a part of the team and yada yada, like I went through this in my last full-time job. I was a therapist in a hospital, and it's a big network. And I went out on maternity leave, and I called my boss when I was 10 weeks of my leave. I think it was only 4 weeks. It was FMLA. Only 4 weeks was paid. So 8 weeks of my 12-week maternity leave was unpaid. And I said, I'm going to come back part-time. I'm not. And I had worked there for 10 years. I had worked for the company for 10 years. And I got, okay, because there's 10, 25-year-old therapist women behind me who don't have children yet, who are waiting to like sit in that chair. And that was kind of like that for me, was that light bulb moment of like, yeah, no, like I'm not investing in something that I don't actually believe in ever again, because it's just, you can't like, these were like, come in and have these in-services and teach people about this and all of the, like, we want to have you as part of the team. But as soon as you're like, I can't function in the way that it needs to be, they're like,
so that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. That was it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous how inflexible and how held onto these like institutional norms that make zero sense companies are. And yeah, unfortunately, it's just far too common.
Yeah. And they have, and I mean, it goes on and on, right? Like, we're all women. All the therapists are women. All the lower level managers are women. And then as soon as you get up into the higher ups, they're all men. And so it's like, oof, we have to unpack that. But the thing that I was thinking about when you were talking about the layoffs is there was a woman, she lives in Europe, and she had successfully sued her employer for being terminated while she was on leave. And they bundled it together with layoffs and stuff like that, like a larger tech company. There's groups on LinkedIn of women that were let go on maternity leave, or they told their employer that they were pregnant. Like, no wonder these conversations are impossible to have, because like I was not going to tell anyone that I was pregnant until I had to. I mean, there was circumstances around my pregnancy that I had to, like, people come in with conditions that you're not supposed to be around when you're pregnant or things like that, where like you basically have to as soon as that happens. But I can't imagine why anyone would, especially if there's a line of people at the door waiting to take your spot.
Exactly. I mean, I have a client right now who's, her company is going to go through a huge round of layoffs. And unfortunately, she has to play a role in that, which feels terrible. She's about to be in her third trimester. She's interviewing in other places. And she's like, how can I possibly tell them that I'm pregnant? And if so, like, when do I tell them? And it's just so unfortunate that it becomes even for women bosses a lot of times, no, I'm not interested in hiring somebody if they're about to go out on leave. Of course, it's like you see their side, you want to hire somebody, you want to hire them now, but like it's so short term, like there's no in terms of like the potential, and there's no flexibility in terms of how to make it work for both sides. It's the one sided piece. And with the parental leave coaching, there's, part of the role, if I'm working with an organization, is to help understand the other perspectives, especially if you're not a parent as a manager, or you haven't had kids, or you're from a different generation where it's just, well, I didn't get any leave, and my wife took care of everything at home. And yeah, it's just completely different mindset. But most of the reason that people who, I mean, even like we're talking about layoffs and people getting let go during pregnancy or maternity leave, but actually a lot of women don't come back because, based on their own decisions, even without being let go, because of the lack of support and lack of flexibility, or the lack of comfort in talking about their needs and advocating for themselves. And it's just too bad. And so often, whether you're an expectant parent or not, it's your manager is the reason why you leave a company. And so part of the hope with the manager training and coaching is to open eyes to possibilities. It's also shocking how many managers aren't even aware of HR policies. So I have a friend who came back, and they basically told her they weren't going to support her breastfeeding pumping journey in any way, shape, or form, even though she was a high performer, been there for years, had worked remotely during the pandemic without a hiccup. And it was just like a hard no. And then come to find out, like, there's all this legislation in place, and she completely could have sued them, but she took the high road because, again, you want to hold them out when you're a new mom. She did do the right thing in terms of just like telling them and basically like a huge blanket email letting everybody know, like, hey, anybody else who's coming back to work from maternity leave, like, has these rights. And so you better get up to speed here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just there's so many stories of like people like breadcrumbing along for the next. However, it's still like it's like that lemmings off the cliff kind of thing, right? Is like you're still like you are those people are putting forth all of that information and stuff that needs to, but then who knows what the follow-up is on that end. Like, one would hope that like the company is like, oh, well, we really dodged a lawsuit there. Let's figure out how to not have this happen for next time. Or is the thought process or pattern, well, it worked out that we didn't have to do anything there, so can we just
Yeah, it's not being, I think, unfortunately, some of these scenarios, they don't like the actual underlying issue doesn't get raised with HR, or if it does, it will actually get raised to like a discrimination case, or there's the perpetrator, if it was, a discriminatory manager or what, like they don't actually have any repercussions. So the processes are, and then I think I'm learning that not all people functions do a great job tracking metrics. So, and thinking about like, if it really is, 40% of women that don't come back after maternity leave, but could, if you did things differently, and it costs up to 2 times their salary to replace them, never mind all like the morale drop and the productivity loss and disruption that causes, why wouldn't companies think about supporting parents differently? And so like I oftentimes lead with the stats because they're pretty shocking, and seemingly, the qualitative anecdotal pieces like people have seen possibly, but they haven't really looked at it numerically or en masse. And it may catch up with companies at some point. I don't know though. This is reminding me of, I think, where we got cut off last time. You were asking about like generational shifts and, maybe the Gen Zs just demanding more from their employers or place. And that may just end up being the natural eventual progression. I mean, obviously we'd love to have more federal support too as a country, but whether it's at that level or the employer level, and of course right now the economy is such that it's an employer market, so they don't really have to go above and beyond to hire people, but that'll change. And then they're going to have to start really paying attention and cluing in.
Yeah, because it'll swing back. I mean, there's, the millennials are the fastest growing population in the workforce that have caregiving responsibilities.
Yeah.
And then anyone behind, like, I think that sometimes, like, there's so many antiquated ways that things go, and a lot of times it benefits a company, right? It's like, we are such and such large building, big sign, all of this. Like, you want to work here because our name is known and all that. But the thing that's not really being addressed, or the thing I don't know, acknowledged, I guess, is like how much building space in New York City is still empty? How much office space is still empty after the pandemic, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And so much. I did know the statistic, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. It's like 30% or something like crazy like that.
It's astounding.
Yeah. Right. So like that's all empty. And like people are retiring out. 10,000 people a day from now until 2030 are hitting 65. They're retiring out. Or even if they stay on later, like they work until they're 70 or 75, they're not working in the way that people that don't need to come into an office are working, right? And then you also have this generation, like the Gen Z generation, they don't want the gold watch after 40 years, right? Like they want to have quality of life and, some sort of delineation between their work life and their home life. And they're going to go work for a company that has that humanity piece. And that's what I love about what you're doing, is because people like have done that, slave to the big building and the big name for so long. And it's just not the way that things really work anymore. And yes, like there are people that still commute into work and people that go into buildings and, all of this stuff. But like as the workforce ages and as people are now able to work in different capacities, things like that, like even in your own career, right? Like you started in tech. So you started in that like super structured corporate, you're a number, log in, log out, whatever. And then now you don't go into an office. Now you work with people like all over the country, all over the world, whatever, wherever it is and wherever they need it. Like you're a great example of the old way not working. And this is the way of the future. And this is what people are looking for. And when those people retire and it swings back to an employee market, the people that are prepared to offer those benefits that their employees want are going to be the ones that survive that.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you're right. And I feel it. I feel it like just hearing you talk about it. It's so powerful. And not that I'm and just to say I'm not equipped to meeting a person. I actually think there's a lot of magic in that. But it's like on what terms, right? It's like, okay, right, let's do this with this intention and not because this is the rule and we want to have control over you. Or not because like some of the big banks are like, oh, we're not gonna pay for the regulation to ensure that remote workers have the level of compliance and safety on their computers that we need. So we're just gonna force them to come to the office and be on our IT networks. It's like, okay.
Right. It's just babysitting. It's adult babysitting.
Exactly.
Like in your life outside of this office, you can pay your rent or pay your mortgage. You can feed yourself. You can bathe yourself. You can get to and from here, whatever. But like between 9 and 5, we actually don't think that you're capable of making any choices for yourself. So we're going to structure your day and we're going to tell you which meetings you're at and we're going to tell you when you can eat lunch and like all this. Like,
yeah,
if you're like a 45-year-old with kids and you're taking care of your parents and someone's like, no, you need to be here for this. Like, that's bananas. It's totally bananas.
It totally is. I heard Emily Oster speak the other day, and she was just talking about how, I mean, it just like really hit home how like that traditional model doesn't work. And it basically means like if you are commuting it into an office, working, typical hours, which are not short days, you and your kids go to bed after dinner, like you're not actually going to see them, which is insane. I mean, insane, except to maybe drop them off at daycare in the morning. If you have that's assuming that you have like a partner who's helping or an au pair or something. But I mean, to me, like as a mom, I just can't imagine that. My most magical time of the day, which inspires me to be a better worker and to be a better coach and to be a better everything, are the moments where I get to just completely check out and let go and be with my daughter and somewhat on her terms, not on my terms.
Mm-hmm. And so you left, like you don't live in New York anymore, right? You like got right out of that situation.
It was definitely a pretty hard decision. I had my daughter in New York, and as a solo mom, my parents came up to help after the birth. And then I was, planning on going back, started her in daycare really early on. And it felt, I mean, when you talk about like friction or humanity, it's like, it just felt wrong. Some kids, like I saw them dropped off at 3 months and they were just like, yay, super stoked. She was not. She was like crying all day and miserable. And yeah, I mean, it's a hard transition. It could have passed. It could have been fine, but it felt really wrong for me. And my parents volunteered to stay involved for longer and help with childcare, which I was, eternally be grateful for. We didn't know what that was going to look like. And so we started splitting time between Brooklyn and Asheville, North Carolina, where they live. And we did that for a while, going back and forth, which, was tricky, but also had a lot of benefits and kept me connected to the city and my community. And then, that blow up happened, my job, and I decided to pursue coaching and shift gears. And some of my lease was up last fall. I decided to let it go because it was just it wasn't serving me in the way that, living there part-time and earning an insane salary that you have to in order to style. But then of course all the costs that come with it. It wasn't working out at that. It didn't make sense. And so I feel like we're still in transition and I haven't like committed to necessarily not going back or committed to staying in Asheville, but we have been here for, I don't know, like 10 months, I guess. And I'm, like I mentioned, eternally grateful to my parents for just being so involved. I mean, my daughter's in preschool now too, but they're still a massive help and support. And it's also just given me like in this space of crafting a new practice and experimenting with a lot of things in my business, just a much lower level of stress in terms of what to accomplish and on what timeline. I know that if I was still living in New York, I'd just probably be back to slamming away because that's what you have to do, unfortunately, to live there. So yeah, it's been very hard. It's been very hard in a lot of ways, but also makes so much sense in other ways.
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to point out because I think that a lot of times people have this idea of like the grass is greener, right? So it's like, I can keep like, I say this and my kids are always looking at me funny, but I'm like, it's like you can keep being told that like you need to stick your head in this blender and like smile about it, which is like, just trying to like I can't, the math doesn't math on this. I cannot make sense of what all these pieces are, right? Like it's great to live in New York. You have access to so many things. You have the capacity to like make a better living but that's because the cost of living is so much more, right? And so there's that idea that like, you get out of the city and it's like a quieter, slower pace of life, yada, yada, it gives you all this time. But like, it's not a perfect transition. And I think that also needs to be talked about more because that's where you wanted to be and that's where you went for various reasons. I think that we did talk about in our other recording about you were trying to scale the business and that you had in California and moved to New York and like all of this stuff, right? So you really like carved out a life, and that like when that doesn't look like it. Also, again, like when people like return back to work, it's like I had a plan for this is what my life's going to look like, because everyone is a perfect parent until they have a child. Like everyone knows exactly what they need to do, and they know exactly how it's going to go and what their kid's going to eat, and that their kid's not going to like, poop out of their onesie in the middle of a restaurant or like whatever, right? But talking about that piece, that transition of like there are trade-offs even when it seems on paper to be a better fit. There's a lot of trade-offs on your end.
Yeah. And I think what's underneath a lot of this is just like the unfortunate lack of choice that people have in the country. I mean, it's like I pay $1,500 a month for health insurance, and that doesn't include, obviously copays, medication costs, all the things. And that's out of pocket. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? And it's like you look at I'm not saying there's any perfect country or perfect model, but there are ones that make sense. I mean, in Japan, I think there's this initiative to just keep housing incredibly affordable so that you can live in a desirable neighborhood of the city and earn minimum wage there. I mean, that is unheard of basically anywhere in the US, right? You think about so whether it's like housing costs, whether it's healthcare costs, whether it's childcare costs, whether it's community support, whether it's just like basic city infrastructure that creates more navigability, community, etc., and education costs, like everything, right? Everything is important as a family, as a parent, as a child, but also as a worker. And so I think there's like ultimately it's just disappointing that in this country the economic model and social model that we have is, not to get too deep in the weeds there, it really does only benefit like the top percent. And that's how it's designed. But like things continue to get more expensive. It's not even possible to be it's almost impossible to live the life that you want to live and be a solo parent. You need two incomes. So even if you wanted to be like a stay-at-home parent, for a short period of time, it's just not even economically feasible with everything else that we have. But then we don't have like you said, you're dismissed when you get back from work, or you don't have like the support to give you that freedom and flexibility. And so a lot of people, you end up making decisions that were not planned and may not necessarily be the best for you, but it's what you have to do. And that's just, I think, what a lot of people have come up against. I mean, a lot of people made realizations about their life during the pandemic and made decisions based on possibility, which is awesome, right? It's like seeing other sides, testing whether the grass is greener, and then evaluating whether it was, coming back or staying away. But I think when it comes to becoming a parent and everything that's attached to that, it usually means like, okay, making some pretty significant sacrifices. And I'm totally fine with making sacrifices. I mean, that's part of it, right? But yeah, there's just like it impacts our well-being and our state of mind as parents when we have to give up like pretty much everything that we were before.
Yeah, it's that no choice. Yeah, it's just a mess. So how do people, if a company is like in this space, like are the people that reach out to you, is it more the company side, or is it more the individual who's like, I'm going through this piece, can you help me? Or is it a company? I mean, I feel like I know the answer to this, but
I mean, it's actually a pretty nascent offering, parental leave coaching. I went through the Center for Parental Leave Leadership. The founder of that has been working in this space for a really long time, but it's still a pretty unknown offering or benefit. And I mean, there's probably in the stage, there are a few players, but ultimately like it's been more of an outbound as opposed to inbound process, and basically conveying the benefits and what happens if you don't offer these types of solutions to your employees and their managers. And so it's a combination. I mean, in terms of like the mix, I think working with expecting parents and parents one-on-one is incredibly rewarding and helping them really hone in on what's important to them, how to process this transition, this identity shift and all of just like the logistical pieces that need to be in place. And a lot of times there's a lot of like deep work and exploration for potentially in our future, kind of back to what we were talking about a minute ago. With the companies, a lot of times, like I mentioned, it's very like the full package is successful and that the manager is understanding the side of the employee and the employee is understanding the side of the business. And so you're basically able to bridge that gap and also just build skills when it comes to like, leadership, communication, collaboration. Like how can you successfully transition your work to a team and have them not resent you? How can you establish a communication that's healthy for you? Like how much do you want to divulge? How much do you want people to ask questions? What's the right balance? Because so often people are like, everything's off limits. I'm not going to even talk to that person or acknowledge that they have maybe. It's like, well, that's probably the last thing I want. Or, very clueless. And so what's the middle ground and what's appropriate for the person? And that's I think why this type of work is like, there is no one size fits all. There are specific tools and resources that support the parental leave transition, but then ultimately to make it successful, it's understanding, meeting people where they are, and also like building in the adaptability and flexibility of what, back to our conversation earlier about the unknown, preparing for that. So it's a mixed bag. I'm starting to build some thought leadership in the space, partnering with a lot of folks in like tangential or similar spaces, creating more awareness for the employers themselves. If anybody's listening who leads an ERG of parents, feel free to reach out. That's another avenue I'm very interested in pursuing. And the model can really be flexible depending on the company or the individual. So it can be, it's more successful if you're thinking about you start early, like 3 months before you're going on leave so that you can get all your ducks in a row, some postpartum support, and then that major shift of return to work. So comprehensive across those phases, but even a workshop is better than nothing. So
yeah,
figuring out what's appropriate, what's cost effective and what's feasible and just taking it from there.
I love the idea of like where like there's programs and there's workshops and there's like facilitation that's happening around reminding people to like have a lot of common sense when it comes to stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's so true. There's so much where it's like, people want to ask you like stories about your delivery and then people want to pretend that like you're the same person that just showed back up. But like what happened in the middle? Like when did we get rid of that? And is it like why?
Yeah. It's such an there's so much richness to discover in that space. You can probably do.
Yeah.
Let's bring out some more gas to really dig in there. But I mean, I think the hypothesis is that with certain people, there's just like a level of cluelessness and inexperience. With others, there's probably like a real lack of empathy, unfortunately, which translates not just to working parents, but to, anybody who doesn't fall into the bucket that they sort of identify with. I think with some folks, it's just like business as usual and it's not personal. I have a friend who's an executive coach and he gets sponsored by employees and one of his clients ended up leaving the company. And it was like this whole thing like, okay, was that a good thing or a bad thing? And ultimately it was a good thing because the coach he's working with a mission driven organization that wants to bring more empathy and humanity into the workforce internally. And this particular client was not interested in that. And so through this coaching work, realized that like, well, he wasn't going to change things and become less personal. It was not a fit for him. And so find himself in another type of organization. I think often it's the flip. Like it's more often that it's a non-personal culture and, people need a little bit of humanity during this phase. And so culture, I think, is ultimately like is a really huge indicator of whether a company is looking out for their employee population and cares about, how people interact, their loyalty to the business. Like, how are they going to talk about this company out? I mean, I think companies also just forget that there's Glassdoor, there's Facebook, there's forums. It's just like your reputation is at stake. And I was listening to a panel discussion the other day and someone was saying like, well, what about these employers that just say, oh, we don't have enough people in our population, our worker population to create a benefit around this, or it doesn't really matter. And this woman was like, my husband, like however many years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago, did not get parental leave. And like, he still harbors resentment towards that company. And so it's not like it just goes away. It's not like, oh, we're just going to ignore, this subset of our workers and everything's going to be fine. It's like, and then they don't realize that like, if you do go above and beyond, even just a tiny bit, it's just like, yeah, okay, let's offer, like, we expect our employee to travel. So why wouldn't we use something like milk sort or pump sweating to like ship the breast milk and make this, just facilitate that small process for this parent? That person's going to evangelize the company. I mean, they're going to talk so strongly about their employer and the culture. And that is like bites for a conversation about like the younger population, the younger generations, like really wanting to find cultures that align with their values and their needs. Like that is going to hopefully be transformative. Anyway.
Yeah, that's what's going to get you to the next. Hey, ramble on. This is your space. This is our time together. You do you. Yeah, no, I think that like that's the point, right? It's like you don't have to read about a business in the newspaper anymore. Like you see it online. There's people there's every type of movement, right? Like quiet quitting and all of that stuff that happens. Like if someone is unhappy, their phone is sitting on their desk.
Yeah. And
there's ways to put it out there not so anonymously, and there's ways to put it out there anonymously. But no matter what, like it's funny because when you're an employee and it comes up for like performance review and stuff like that, like that's the like, one time of year where it's formal and someone like tells you all of this stuff, right? I got thoughts on that, but that's a whole other thing. But it's like, as a company, you're performance review every day.
Right.
And so why would you not want to set it up so that when someone's like, these people did not like this thing didn't work out, yada, yada, then you have another person who's sitting 2 desks over who's like, yeah, but remember when you were traveling and you got stuck and they like had this whole thing set up so that you didn't lose all that milk and blah, blah, blah. Like that's the stuff that will stay front of mind. If you make people's lives easier in a way that matters the most to them, you're gonna get more wiggle room to say, yeah, no, we need you to work on this day, or
Exactly. Yeah. So much so. Yeah. It's like, those are the life experiences, the lived experiences that stay with you.
Exactly. All right. Well, tell everybody where they can find you.
Yes, absolutely. So my website is NicoleLenzen.com, NicoleLenzen. And if you're interested in learning more about coaching, different capacities, feel free to explore. You can book a free consult with me just to get to know, see if there's a mutual fit, learn more about what the offerings are. I also have my newsletter called Layer by Layer on Substack. You can just get there, blog.NicoleLenzen.com to the shortcut. And I'm on Instagram, sort of. Nicole Lenzen Coaching, all one word.
Nice.
Is the best means.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And it's like one more soldier for like people being people and treating other people like people and showing people how to treat other people like people. It's just, like, thank you for being a human in a human removal-ish world. Not the AI thing, but just like human to human. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I've really enjoyed our conversation and hope to have more because there's so much more.
So much more. Yes. Well, you have to come back because I have ideas.
Yay. All right. We'll stay in touch. Thank you, Ashley, for everything you do.